The oppressive canopy of Hasteman Woods cast long, skeletal shadows as two figures clad in mud-caked hiking gear pushed their way through the dense undergrowth. Sweat beaded on their foreheads despite the rapidly cooling air. "Hey, dude," huffed Hiker 1, a young man with a mop of unruly brown hair. "It's getting late. Maybe we should call it a day and head back?" Hiker 2, a woman with a determined glint in her hazel eyes, squinted at the darkening sky through the leaves. "Yeah," she agreed, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. "It's definitely past sunset. This place gets creepy enough in the daylight." They had been drawn to Hasteman Woods, lured by tales of its untouched beauty and challenging trails. But as twilight descended, the charm of the woods had morphed into a sense of unsettling isolation. The silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the snap of a twig underfoot, pressed in on them, thick and suffocating. As they rounded a bend in the path, a sudden sound shattered the silence. A sharp crackle, like a twig snapping under a heavy foot, echoed through the trees. Both hikers froze, their hearts hammering in their chests. "What was that?" Hiker 1 whispered, his voice barely audible. Hiker 2, ever the pragmatist, gripped the trekking pole in her hand tighter. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice laced with unease, but it sounded unnatural. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a low rustling noise that sent shivers down their spines. They exchanged a worried glance, a silent question hanging in the air. "Should we check it out?" Hiker 1 asked, his bravado a little strained. Hiker 2 shook her head, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. "Let's just head back the way we came," she said, her voice firm. "There's no point in getting ourselves lost in the dark." Turning on their heels, they picked up their pace, the unsettling sounds echoing behind them. The forest seemed to press in closer, the rustling leaves whispering secrets in the gathering darkness. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through them, their imaginations conjuring terrifying images in the inky shadows. Panic hammered in their chests as they stumbled through the darkened woods. The crackling sound had become a persistent nightmare, a constant reminder of their predicament. The sound again, Hiker 1 gasped, his voice choked with fear. "It's getting closer." Hiker 2, her face pale in the fading light, forced a semblance of calm. "All right, let's check it out," she said, her voice betraying a tremor of fear. "Maybe it's just a deer or something." They followed the sound, their pace quickening with each passing moment. The dense foliage clawed at their clothes, the darkness swallowing them whole. The forest floor dipped suddenly, leading into a shallow depression. As they cautiously ventured further, Hiker 1 let out a strangled cry and froze in his tracks. "Oh no, what is that?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Hiker 2, propelled by a morbid curiosity, turned around, her breath hitched in her throat. There, standing amidst the gnarled trees, bathed in an unnatural sliver of moonlight, was a figure that defied explanation. A tall, emaciated silhouette, its limbs elongated far beyond human proportions. Its head was shrouded in shadow, devoid of any features. It was a blank canvas, an absence staring back at them. "Oh no, is it?" Hiker 2 choked out, her voice trembling beyond recognition. The figure tilted its head ever so slightly, a gesture that sent a wave of pure terror crashing over them. Static crackled in the air, a distortion that seemed to emanate from the figure itself. The image flickered and warped, their vision blurring at the edges. A blood-curdling scream, abruptly cut short, echoed through the woods. Then, silence. The camera glitched one last time, a kaleidoscope of distorted images, before fading out into an inky blackness.
The crisp autumn air of Winnipeg bit at exposed skin as the late afternoon sun cast an orange glow across the city. Traffic hummed along Portage Avenue, a steady stream of cars weaving between honks and impatient horns. Amongst the usual cityscape chaos, a faded poster clung precariously to a lamppost, its edges frayed by the wind. It depicted a young man, maybe in his early 20s, with a warm smile and kind eyes. Below him, stark black letters declared, "Missing. George Carter. Last seen entering Hasteman Woods. 1 week ago. Any information appreciated. Call 204-555 Across the street, a bus stop bustled with activity. A lone bench held a woman huddled inside a thick wool coat, her face buried in a worn paperback. A nearby speaker crackled to life, a news report replacing the usual bus announcements. The voice, a familiar anchor with a practiced calmness, sent a shiver down the woman's spine. And the search continues for 2 more individuals, Sarah Thompson and Michael Lee, who vanished near Hasteman Woods just yesterday. Police have confirmed a connection to George Carter, who disappeared from the same location 1 week ago. Authorities urge anyone with information to come forward. The woman flinched, a sudden breeze rustling the skeletal branches of nearby trees. Her eyes darted towards the woods just visible in the distance, a thick veil of darkness already settling amongst the trees. Hasteman Woods. The name seemed to hang heavy in the air, a chilling whisper against the backdrop of the city's usual noise. With a newfound urgency, she clutched her book tighter, the cheerful cover art feeling strangely out of place. The city, once a comforting constant, now seemed to hold a hidden menace, a shadow stretching from the depths of those accursed woods. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as 4 friends, Frank, Lisa, Chris, and Jake, ambled down the footpath bordering the main road near BC University. Their backpacks weighed heavily on their shoulders, remnants of a long day filled with lectures and note-taking. The air crackled with their animated conversation, dissecting the previous day's math test. "Ugh, those complex number problems were brutal," grumbled Frank, scratching his head in mock confusion. "Seriously, who even uses imaginary numbers in real life?" Lisa, ever the logical one, chimed in, "They might seem abstract, Frank, but they're the foundation for things like electrical engineering and quantum mechanics. Pretty relevant in the real world, actually." Chris, the jokester of the group, nudged Jake with his elbow. "Yeah, maybe imaginary numbers can help you imagine your way out of a failing grade, eh, Jake?" Jake, a natural with numbers, chuckled. "Don't worry, Chris, I aced it. Unlike someone who spent all night trying to understand imaginary circles." Their playful banter continued, the tension of the test fading with every step. Suddenly, Jake stopped, his gaze fixed on a nearby lamppost. A faded poster with a familiar face caught his attention. "Wait a minute, guys," Jake said, his voice dropping a notch. "Hold on. Look at this." He pointed towards the poster. The rest of the group followed his gaze, their laughter dying down. The image of a young man with a warm smile stared back at them. George Carter, the missing person from the news. "Didn't we hear about this on the news yesterday?" Chris questioned, peering at the poster. "Yeah," Lisa confirmed, a frown creasing her brow. "But why is there a missing poster here? Those woods are all the way down south in Winnipeg, right?" Frank scanned the poster, eyes landing on the details below the picture. "Last seen entering Hasteman Woods," he mumbled. "That's crazy. How could someone just disappear like that?" There was a beat of silence. The playful mood from before had evaporated, replaced by a sense of unease. They looked at each other, a question hanging in the air. An unsettling quiet had descended upon the group, the weight of the missing poster pressing down on them. Then, Chris, ever the instigator, spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. "Hey," Chris said, his eyes fixated on the poster, "I think it's him." Lisa shivered, her breath forming a small cloud in the cool air. Who's him? Frank, brow furrowed, echoed Lisa's question. Yeah, Chris, what do you mean by him? Chris turned to them, a dark glint in his eyes. Slender Man, haven't you heard? The stories about Hastaman Woods. They say Slender Man lurks there, tall and faceless, with limbs that stretch like shadows. He preys on the lost, the lonely, and anyone foolish enough to enter his domain. A jolt of electricity seemed to run down Lisa's spine. A vague memory flickered in her mind, a campfire tale whispered amongst friends, chilling stories of a creature that stretched from the woods, stealing children. Isn't that just a story? Lisa stammered, clutching her backpack straps tighter. Frank scoffed. Yeah, Chris, come on. Slender Man is just an internet creepypasta, a fictional monster made up by bored kids on the web. Chris leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Is that what you really think? Ever heard of those missing hikers in Montana a few years back? No trace, just their abandoned campsite. Rumors say someone saw a tall, faceless figure lurking at the edge of the woods. Jake, usually the level-headed one, felt a prickle of unease crawl up his neck. Despite his skepticism, the unsettling atmosphere and Chris's conviction sent a shiver down his spine. He tried to lighten the mood with a forced laugh. Oh, come on, Chris. Don't tell me you actually believe in Slender Man. He's just a creepy internet myth, a fictional internet boogeyman. But even as the words left his mouth, Jake couldn't shake the image of the poster George's smiling face, replaced by an elongated featureless head, his eyes two bottomless pits of darkness. The setting sun cast an eerie glow on the surrounding trees, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Suddenly, a twig snapped in the distance, a sharp crack that sliced through the silence. All four friends turned towards the sound, hearts hammering in their chests. The shadows seemed to deepen, the air growing colder with an unseen presence. A sudden, inexplicable urge to flee, to escape the oppressive atmosphere, gripped them all. In that moment, the line between fiction and horrifying reality blurred, leaving them questioning, was Slender Man just a legend, or something far more terrifying? Panic prickled at the edges of Jake's vision. The playful debate about Slender Man had morphed into something far more unsettling, the woods suddenly feeling less like a distant news story and more like a looming threat. But a spark of defiance ignited within him. There's only one way to settle this, Jake declared, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hands. We go to Hastaman Woods ourselves. See for ourselves what's really going on. The statement hung heavy in the air. Lisa, Chris, and Frank stared at him, expressions a mix of confusion and sheer terror. Are you out of your mind, Jake? Chris sputtered, his bravado from moments ago replaced by a healthy dose of fear. We're not exactly wilderness survival experts, you know. I don't exactly fancy becoming another missing person statistic. Lisa chimed in, her voice tight with anxiety. Yeah, Jake, have you forgotten about those hikers? Who knows what happened to them? We could end up the same way. Frank, ever the pragmatist, added his voice to the chorus of disapproval. Look, Lisa's right. We don't need to be heroes. Slender Man or not, those woods are dangerous. Getting lost, wild animals, there are plenty of real threats out there. Jake felt a surge of frustration. Here he was, trying to be brave, to face their fear head on, and they were all backing down. Come on, guys, he argued, trying to sound confident. There's no such thing as Slender Man. It's all just creepy stories. We'll be fine. We just need to be prepared, that's all. Lisa shot him a skeptical look. Prepared for what? An encounter with a faceless boogeyman. Besides, what about wolves or bears? Those are real dangers, Jake. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The setting sun cast long, menacing shadows across the sidewalk, and the once bustling street seemed eerily quiet. Jake, his voice laced with a nervous tremor, attempted a reassuring smile. "Look, guys," Jake started, "I get it. It's scary. But think about it, wouldn't it be the ultimate bragging right? Exploring those woods, proving there's no Slender Man, no creepy legend. This will be a cool adventure, a story to tell for years to come." He knew it was a flimsy argument, a desperate attempt to mask his own churning fear. The image of the missing person poster, George's cheerful face replaced by an unsettling emptiness, sent chills down his spine. Yet, he couldn't back down now. Not after planting the seed of doubt. Chris, ever the instigator, was the first to show a flicker of interest. "Cool adventure, huh? Sounds better than another boring weekend stuck in my dorm room." Lisa, ever cautious, still hesitated. But what if the stories are true? What if there are things out there? We're not exactly Bear Grylls, you know. A flicker of unease passed through Frank's eyes. "Yeah, Lisa's right. Remember those hikers? We don't want to become another missing persons case." Jake pressed on, his voice gaining a touch of desperation. "We'll be careful, okay? We won't go deep into the woods. Just a quick peek, enough to satisfy our curiosity. Besides, with 4 of us, who's going to mess with us?" He knew it was a weak argument, but a seed of doubt had been planted. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken fear and a strange perverse thrill. Finally, Chris broke it with a reluctant sigh. All right, he conceded, a hint of bravado in his voice. "But we're doing this your way, Jake. Quick in, quick out. No heroics." Lisa and Frank exchanged a nervous glance, but a sense of morbid curiosity, fueled by Jake's words, seemed to win over their fear. "Fine," Lisa muttered, her voice laced with apprehension. "But if anything happens, we're blaming you, Jake." A triumphant grin spread across Jake's face, masking the knot of fear tightening in his stomach. He had them. Maybe it wasn't the wisest decision, but there was no turning back now. They were about to embark on a journey into the heart of a local legend, the unknown depths of Hastement Woods, waiting to swallow them whole. The asphalt jungle gave way to a dense canopy of trees as the 4 friends reached the base of Hastement Woods. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick foliage, casting the forest floor in an unsettling twilight. An oppressive silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or the rustle of unseen creatures. "All right, team," Jake said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Remember, stick together. No heroics, no wandering off." They plunged into the woods, the path ahead barely visible under a carpet of fallen leaves. Thorns snagged at their clothes, and unseen creatures scuttled in the undergrowth, sending shivers down their spines. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent their hearts hammering in their chests. 30 minutes into their trek, the oppressive silence was broken by a sight that sent chills down their spines. A solitary cabin, weathered and ramshackle, peeked through the dense foliage. Smoke curled from a chimney, a faint wisp against the darkening sky. "Look, guys," Lisa whispered, her voice barely a breath. An old abandoned cabin. A sense of unease settled over them. Who would live in such a remote location? And was the smoke a recent development? "Someone must have used to live here," Frank murmured, his eyes scanning the dilapidated structure. Chris, however, seemed more focused on the setting sun. "Guys," he said, his voice laced with a newfound urgency, "it's getting late. The sun will be down soon. We shouldn't explore any further. Let's just get back home safe." His words held a newfound weight, the oppressive atmosphere and the sight of the abandoned cabin amplifying their fear. A low moan echoed through the trees, sending a jolt of terror through them. Was it the wind or something more sinister? The cabin, a beacon of mystery in the darkening woods, seemed to beckon them closer, a silent dare against their growing fear. "Maybe Chris is right," Lisa said, her voice trembling slightly. "We can always come back another day, with more supplies and maybe even." She trailed off, the implication hanging heavy in the air, maybe with someone who knew what they were doing. Jake, however, felt a strange compulsion to investigate. He couldn't explain it, but the thought of turning back now, leaving the secrets of the cabin and the woods unsolved, gnawed at him. "Just a peek," he argued, his voice strained. "We can take a quick look and head back before it gets too dark." The decision hung in the balance, the air crackling with tension. The abandoned cabin, a silent sentinel in the heart of the woods, awaited their choice. Would they succumb to fear and turn back, or would they venture into the unknown, their curiosity a flame flickering in the encroaching darkness? The decision to investigate the abandoned cabin proved to be a colossal mistake. Enticed by the mystery and fueled by a surge of bravado, they ventured closer, their initial apprehension replaced by a morbid fascination. The cabin loomed larger, its windows like vacant eyes staring back at them. A closer look revealed broken shutters and a door hanging precariously on a single rusty hinge. But their exploration was short-lived. As they circled the cabin, their focus solely on the dilapidated structure, a chilling realization dawned on them. The woods around them looked unfamiliar. The path they had taken seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the dense undergrowth. Panic clawed at their throats. "Oh no, guys," Jake stammered, his voice laced with a tremor that belied his attempt at bravado. I think we're lost." Lisa's eyes widened in alarm. "What do you mean lost?" she shrieked, her voice a high-pitched squeak. Frank, usually the calm one, fumbled in his pocket. "Use the compass, Jake," he urged, his voice tight with anxiety. Jake's heart sank. He pulled out the compass, its needle spinning erratically, refusing to settle on a direction. "The compass isn't working," he choked out, a cold sweat forming on his brow. "The magnetic field, it must be messed up here." Chris, ever the pragmatist, tried to salvage the situation. "Which direction did we even come from? Does anyone remember?" His question hung heavy in the air, met by a chorus of panicked mumbles. They had been so consumed by the mystery of the cabin that they hadn't bothered to keep track of their path. The sun, their only guide, was sinking lower, casting elongated shadows that danced menacingly amongst the trees. "We've been walking for a while," Jake mumbled, dread creeping into his voice. "Probably close to an hour. We could be miles from where we started." The enormity of their situation crashed down on them. Lost in the vast expanse of Hastement Woods, with darkness approaching and a malfunctioning compass, fear tightened its icy grip. The abandoned cabin, once an object of curiosity, now mocked them, a stark reminder of their folly. The last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that bled rapidly into an inky blackness. The oppressive silence of the woods was shattered only by the frantic pounding of their hearts and the labored gasps of their breaths. The air grew thick and humid, a heavy feeling of impending rain settling over them. "Guys," Jake panted, his voice strained, "the cabin is our only hope now. We need to get there before it gets completely dark." Frank, ever the pragmatist, chimed in, his voice laced with a tremor of fear. "But it's going to rain soon. We'll be soaked to the bone if we stay out here." Lisa, her eyes wide with desperation, took charge. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "We need to get inside that cabin. It might not be ideal, but it's better than being out here in the open." Chris, his bravado long gone, simply nodded in agreement. The urgency in their voices mirrored the churning fear in their hearts. The cabin, a mere silhouette against the darkening sky, beckoned them with the promise of meager shelter. With renewed energy fueled by desperation, they pushed through the undergrowth, their pace quickening with every gust of wind and every rustle of leaves. The cabin, once a distant landmark, grew larger with each step. Just as they reached the clearing where the cabin stood, a fat drop of rain splattered on Jake's cheek, followed soon by another and another. The heavens opened, unleashing a torrent of rain that lashed down mercilessly. Scrambling for cover, they lunged towards the cabin, the rickety porch offering a temporary shield from the downpour. Huddled together, they pounded on the creaky wooden door, a desperate plea for refuge in the face of the storm and the encroaching darkness. The scene outside was a chaotic dance of wind and rain, the forest a menacing silhouette against the inky sky. Inside the cabin, darkness held its breath, waiting for their uninvited arrival. Relief washed over them in a wave as the rickety door creaked open, revealing the dark interior of the cabin. Thankfully, it wasn't locked. They tumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind them with a resounding bang, desperately trying to keep the rain at bay. The air inside was stale and heavy with dust, the musty scent of neglect clinging to everything. A single bare bulb cast a dim, flickering light, powered by a faint hum that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within the cabin. It was far from luxurious, but in that moment, it felt like a palace. "We should probably stay here for the night," Jake said, his voice hoarse from exertion. The ordeal had left them drained, both physically and emotionally. Lisa and Frank offered murmured agreements, the exhaustion evident in their slumped shoulders and weary eyes. Chris, however, seemed to have a spark of energy left. "All right, then let's get settled," Chris said, a hint of his usual bravado returning. "Upstairs first, find a place to rest our weary bones." With a collective sigh, the four friends ventured further into the cabin. A creaky wooden staircase led them upwards, each step groaning under their weight. The dim light barely reached the upper floor, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced on the walls. The landing opened into a narrow hallway. 3 doors, their paint chipped and peeling, lined the corridor. A sense of age hung heavy in the air, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the generator and the drumming of the rain on the roof. Chris, ever the curious one, pushed open the first door. Inside, a single bed sat collecting dust beneath a cobweb-draped window. The glass in the window was old and wavy, offering a distorted view of the storm raging outside. The other 2 rooms revealed similar Spartan arrangements, simple beds and dusty furniture. Despite the lack of amenities, it was a far cry from the cold rain and menacing darkness of the woods. Exhaustion finally winning over their fear, they decided to claim their respective rooms for the night. Relief was a temporary balm. As the adrenaline subsided, a new problem arose, a logistical one. "Guys," Jake began, his voice barely a whisper in the echoing silence, "there's a bit of a problem. We're 4, and there are only 3 rooms." Lisa, ever the practical one, chimed in, a hint of amusement in her voice despite the situation. "Well, obviously I'm taking a room," she said with a playful wink. "Girls' room and all." Chris, ever the opportunist, wasted no time. "Second one's mine then," he declared, grabbing the doorknob before anyone else could react. Jake, left with the last remaining room, simply shrugged. "Third one for me, I guess." Frank, however, stood awkwardly in the center of the hallway, the weight of the missing room settling on him. Guys," he started, a touch of sheepishness in his voice, "what about me?" A beat of uncomfortable silence followed. The initial relief of finding shelter had evaporated, replaced by the awkward reality of their limited accommodations. "Sorry, Frank," Jake said apologetically. "The beds aren't exactly spacious enough for 2. Frank, ever the easygoing one, flashed a reassuring smile. "Nah, no worries," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "The couch downstairs looks pretty comfy. I'll be alright there, saves you guys from squishing together." The wave of gratitude washed over Jake and Chris. Lisa, however, seemed hesitant. Although Frank's solution seemed practical, a flicker of concern crossed her face. "Are you sure, Frank?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. "Downstairs all alone? It's a creepy old cabin after all." Frank, sensing her unease, gave her a reassuring pat on the arm. "Don't worry about me, Liz. I'll be fine. Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on the fire, right?" he added, gesturing towards a dusty fireplace in the corner of the room. With a forced smile, Lisa nodded. Although Frank's words calmed the immediate tension, a seed of unease remained. The flickering light cast grotesque shadows on the walls, and the rhythmic drumming of the rain seemed to whisper secrets in the darkness. As they settled into their respective quarters, a new worry gnawed at them. Would they all survive the night in this isolated cabin, or would the shadows hold a darker secret? Outside, the storm raged with a vengeance. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing through the trees and lashing rain against the cabin walls. Bolts of lightning split the sky momentarily, illuminating the desolate woods in an eerie white light. Frank, alone downstairs on the creaking sofa, found himself lost in thought. Slender Man. The name echoed in his mind, a whisper in the storm's fury. Was it just a creepy story, a campfire tale to send shivers down spines? Or was there a sliver of truth lurking beneath the layers of fiction? As the clock on the wall ticked past 10, a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye caught his attention. He squinted through the dim light, his heart hammering in his chest. It was probably just a trick of the shadows, a figment of his overactive imagination fueled by the storm and the unsettling atmosphere. Suddenly, his gaze fell upon something partially hidden beneath the dusty cushion of the sofa, a picture frame. Curiosity piqued, he reached down and retrieved it. A jolt of terror surged through him as he recognized the image, a grainy photograph, seemingly ripped from a newspaper, depicting a tall, emaciated figure with no face, its limbs stretched out unnaturally. Slender Man. This wasn't a campfire tale, this was captured evidence. Panic welled up within him, but the thought of scaring his friends further kept him silent. He shoved the picture back under the cushion, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. Just then, the cabin plunged into darkness. A loud crackle resonated from somewhere outside, followed by an unsettling silence. The power had gone out. Frank's breath hitched. In the sudden darkness, the cabin felt even more oppressive. He fumbled in his backpack, his hand brushing against the familiar shape of his flashlight. A surge of relief washed over him as he clicked it on, the beam cutting through the inky blackness. The sudden plunge into darkness sent a jolt of fear through the cabin. Upstairs, Lisa and Chris jolted awake, their hearts hammering in their chests. "What happened?" Lisa gasped, scrambling out of bed. "Don't know," Chris replied, his voice barely a whisper. "Power's out." They fumbled their way down the creaky stairs, the only sound their panicked breaths and the drumming of the rain on the roof. They found Frank sitting on the sofa, a single flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "What's going on?" Lisa asked, her voice laced with apprehension. Frank, startled by their sudden appearance, nearly jumped out of his skin. "Oh, hey guys," he stammered, forcing a smile. "Just a power outage, probably a load shedding with the storm." The explanation did little to ease the tension that hung heavy in the air. Lisa scanned the room, her eyes drawn to the flickering flashlight beam. "What are you doing down here with the light?" Just looking for something," Frank mumbled, avoiding their eyes. Suddenly, Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, a determined glint in his eyes. "Guys, I think I know how to get the lights back on." "How?" Chris asked, a flicker of hope sparking in his eyes. "The generator," Jake explained. "If we switch it on manually, the power should come back." Lisa's face fell. "But it's pouring rain outside. It's dangerous to go out in this weather." Frank, however, seemed unfazed. "Don't worry, I'll go. It's closer to the cabin than venturing deep into the woods." "No, Frank, it's too risky," Chris protested. "The ground will be slick, and you could get struck by lightning." A tense silence filled the room. The storm raged outside, a relentless assault of wind and rain. Inside the cabin, the air crackled with nervous energy. Just then, Jake stepped forward, a resolute expression on his face. "I'll go with him," he declared. "I can hold the flashlight so Frank can't see what he's doing." Frank hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but be careful. Stay close and don't stray from the cabin." With a shared look of apprehension, Jake and Frank grabbed whatever waterproof gear they could find, an old raincoat and a tattered umbrella. As they opened the rickety cabin door, a gust of wind howled through the opening, sending a shiver down their spines. The storm awaited them, a raging beast in the darkness. Would their quest for light lead them into a deeper darkness, or would they manage to illuminate the cabin and the secrets it held? Rain lashed against their faces like icy needles as Frank and Jake ventured out of the cabin. The wind howled, tearing at their raincoats, their only meager protection against the fury of the storm. Thankfully, the lightning had ceased its terrifying display, replaced by an inky blackness that swallowed everything beyond the narrow beam of Jake's flashlight. They walked cautiously, the mud squelching under their feet, each rustle of leaves sending shivers down their spines. They ventured further than expected, the generator still frustratingly out of sight. Just as a sliver of doubt began to creep into Jake's mind, Frank pointed ahead. "There it is," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. Relief washed over them as they hurried towards the bulky silhouette of the generator. The single flickering light on its control panel mocked their predicament. With trembling hands, Frank fumbled with the switch, a silent prayer escaping his lips. Suddenly, the flashlight in Jake's hand slipped from his grasp, clattering to the muddy ground and plunging them into darkness. "Oh no!" Jake yelped, desperation lacing his voice. "The torch. It's gone." "Don't worry," Frank grunted, his voice strained with the effort of manipulating the controls in the oppressive darkness. "The generator has an indicator light. It should turn on when..." His voice trailed off abruptly. A tense silence descended, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. 3 excruciating minutes passed. Each second stretched into an eternity, the darkness a thick, suffocating blanket. Then, with a satisfying whir, the generator roared to life. Light flooded back into the world, banishing the shadows and revealing the clearing around them. Relief washed over Frank, so intense it almost made him weak. As he straightened up, his eyes caught a flicker of movement in the periphery of his vision. A tall, dark figure, shrouded in the rain and darkness, darted from behind one of the skeletal trees lining the clearing to another. It moved with unnatural fluidity, almost gliding over the slick ground. Frank's blood ran cold. He froze, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. "Jake," he started, his voice barely a whisper. But Jake wasn't beside him. Frank whirled around, his heart hammering in his chest. "Jake, where are you?" he called out, panic rising in his throat. A rustling sound came from the edge of the woods. Frank whipped around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, emerging from the trees, stood Jake, his face pale and etched with confusion. "Frank, are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "What are you?" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening in terror as they landed on the spot where Frank had seen the shadowy figure. "What?" he choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "What was that if you're here?" Behind them, the wind howled mournfully through the trees. The woods stood silent, cloaked in a darkness that seemed to writhe and pulse with a life of its own. The rain continued its relentless assault, washing away any trace of the dark figure Frank had seen. But the chilling realization settled in their gut like a block of ice. They weren't alone. Something watched them from the shadows, a silent predator waiting for the right moment to strike. The power may have been back, but the true darkness had only just begun. The cabin door slammed shut behind them, a welcome barrier against the raging storm. Relief flooded Lisa's face as she rushed towards Frank, engulfing him in a sudden hug. Caught off guard, Frank stammered, his face flushing crimson under his rain-soaked clothes. "Lisa?" he mumbled, surprised by the unexpected gesture. "Thank goodness you're all right," she exclaimed, her voice laced with relief. "I was so scared in the dark." A small smile tugged at the corner of Jake's lips as he watched the exchange. "Looks like someone's got a hero complex," he teased, nudging Chris with his elbow. Chris chuckled. "Glad you two are safe," he said, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine concern. "That was a close call." After a moment of shared relief, the adrenaline subsided, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. With a collective yawn, Jake, Lisa, and Chris shuffled upstairs, their rooms beckoning with the promise of sleep. Frank, however, remained downstairs, his mind replaying the scene from the clearing. The chilling image of the dark figure flitting behind the trees haunted him. Was it just a trick of the shadows, a figment of his fear magnified by the storm and the darkness? Or was there something truly sinister lurking in the woods, a creature of legend come to life? He stared out the window, the rain-streaked glass blurring the world outside. The wind howled like a banshee, carrying whispers through the trees that sounded suspiciously like laughter. He shivered, a cold dread creeping into his heart. The generator hummed steadily in the background, a comforting yet unsettling reminder of their precarious situation. They were trapped in the cabin, the storm a raging wall cutting them off from the outside world. And whatever had been watching them in the woods, it was still out there. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and riddled with nightmares. Frank dreamt of shadowy figures with long, grasping limbs, their faces obscured by darkness. He awoke with a gasp, the sheets tangled around him, the dream clinging to him like a shroud. The storm had subsided, replaced by an eerie silence. Midnight had crawled in, cloaking the cabin in an inky blackness. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind an unsettling stillness that pressed against the windows like a heavy hand. Frank, curled up on the creaky sofa downstairs, was pulled from a restless sleep by a sound that sent a jolt through him. A rustle. A snap. A sound unlike the settling of the house or the creaking of the floorboards. It came from outside, from the depths of the Hastement woods. Frank lay frozen, his heart hammering in his chest. Was it just a branch scraping against the window in the lingering wind? Or something more? Curiosity, tinged with a healthy dose of fear, gnawed at him. He had to know. Slowly, ever so slowly, he pushed himself off the sofa and crept towards the window. The cabin floorboards groaned under his weight, each creak a hammer blow in the oppressive silence. Reaching the window, he peeked through a gap in the rain-streaked glass. The forest outside was even more menacing in the absence of rain. Moonlight, pale and diffused by a thin veil of clouds, cast long, skeletal shadows that danced across the forest floor. The trees, stripped bare by the storm, stood like silent sentinels, their branches reaching towards the sky like grasping claws. Suddenly, a crackle broke the stillness. A sharp snap, like a twig breaking underfoot. It came from somewhere deeper in the woods, beyond the clearing where the generator hummed softly. Then, a sound that sent shivers down Frank's spine. A faint, almost inaudible call for help. A voice, raw with desperation, echoing through the silent trees. "Help me." Frank's breath caught in his throat. His mind warred with itself. It could be a trick, a figment of his sleep-deprived imagination fueled by fear and the unsettling atmosphere. But what if it was real? What if someone was truly out there, lost and injured? Hesitation gnawed at him, but a sense of responsibility, a sliver of heroism pushing past his fear, made a decision for him. He couldn't just ignore the call. With a deep breath, Frank grabbed the flashlight from the coffee table, its reassuring weight grounding him slightly. He cast a nervous glance at the rickety door, a silent plea for his friends to stay asleep, unaware of the danger he was about to walk into. Slowly, his hand trembling slightly, Frank reached for the doorknob. The cold metal sent another shiver down his spine, a stark contrast to the warmth of the cabin he was about to leave behind. With a final glance at the sleeping forms upstairs, Frank stepped out into the cool night air, the darkness of the forest swallowing him whole. The faint call for help echoed again, a beacon drawing him deeper into the heart of Hastement Woods, a place where shadows held secrets and the line between fear and reality blurred in the moonlight. The forest floor crunched under Frank's hesitant steps, each sound amplified in the dead of night. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a tangled mess of undergrowth and gnarled roots. He moved with agonizing slowness, every rustle of leaves making him jump. The crackling sound grew stronger, leading him deeper into the woods. It seemed to emanate from somewhere beyond the clearing where the generator hummed, the only familiar landmark in this maze of darkness. Reaching the clearing, Frank hesitated. The faint hum of the generator offered a precarious comfort, a reminder of the refuge he'd left behind. But the call for help, though fainter now, still pulled him forward. He ventured beyond the clearing, his flashlight beam bouncing off the trunks of towering trees. The forest floor here was uneven, littered with fallen branches and loose rocks. He cursed under his breath as his foot caught on a hidden root, sending him sprawling forward. The landing knocked the wind out of him. His flashlight clattered a few feet away, rolling to a stop under a low-hanging branch. Disoriented, Frank lay there for a moment, his heart hammering in his chest. He gingerly pushed himself up, feeling a sharp pain in his ankle. He cursed again, reaching for his flashlight. As he fumbled for it, his breath hitched. A dark figure. Tall and gaunt, it stood on the edge of the clearing, shrouded in the shadows just beyond the reach of his flashlight beam. It seemed to shift, moving from one side of a massive oak to the other with an unnatural fluidity. "Hey!" Frank shouted, his voice hoarse. "Who's there?" But the figure remained silent, unmoving. It observed him with an unsettling stillness, emanating an aura of malice that sent shivers down Frank's spine. Terror gripped him. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in his ankle, and stumbled backwards towards the safety of the generator's faint hum. As he took a step, his foot met nothing but air. He had stumbled off a hidden depression in the ground, a natural pit concealed by the thick undergrowth. He tumbled down, the rough earth scraping against his skin. With a grunt, he landed at the bottom, his ankle screaming in protest. He lay there, trapped, his flashlight lying just out of reach at the top of the pit. The darkness pressed in on him, suffocating and thick. Above him, the rustling of leaves resumed. The figure had moved closer, its presence sending a wave of primal fear crashing over him. Frank was no longer just scared. He was utterly terrified. He was trapped, alone, and something sinister lurked above, waiting for him to make his next move. In the suffocating darkness of the pit, a single thought echoed in his mind. Had he made a terrible mistake venturing into the heart of Hasteman Woods? The frantic scramble filled the air as Frank clawed at the loose dirt, his fingers finally brushing against the reassuring coolness of his flashlight. Relief flooded him momentarily as he snatched it and flicked it on. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing the sheer walls of the pit and a tangle of roots protruding from the surrounding earth. But the source of the crackling sound remained a mystery. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a constant reminder of the unseen presence above. Just as the oppressive silence began to gnaw at him again, a flash of movement caught his eye. The blur of brown fur shot across the edge of the pit, landing on a low-hanging branch with a startled chirp. It was a squirrel, its beady black eyes gleaming in the flashlight beam. Frank let out a shaky breath, a wave of relief washing over him. "Oh, haha," he stammered, a touch of hysteria lacing his voice. "It's just a squirrel. I'm such a scaredy cat." The squirrel, seemingly unfazed by Frank's outburst, chattered at him for a moment before scampering further up the tree. A small smile tugged at the corner of Frank's lips. Maybe things weren't so bad after all. Maybe his imagination had gotten the better of him. But just as his fear started to recede, a new, more primal sensation hit him. It was a smell. A pungent, sickening odor that filled the pit and sent a wave of nausea crashing over him. It was the smell of rotting meat, with a strange, almost fruity undertone. The smell of death. Frank's stomach lurched. He shoved the image of a decaying carcass to the back of his mind, attributing it to some unfortunate animal that had met its demise in the woods. Ignoring the unsettling odor, he attempted to stand, his throbbing ankle protesting with a sharp pang. As he put weight on his foot, his leg brushed against something soft and yielding. He reached down, his fingers brushing against a rough fabric. It was a bag. Curiosity piqued, he shone the flashlight on it. It was a worn backpack, seemingly abandoned by a hiker. Relief washed over him, a sign he wasn't completely alone in these woods. But as he shifted the bag to get a better look, the beam of light fell on side of the backpack. What he saw there made him completely shocked and silent. Whatever Frank saw gave a huge terror out of him.